session entitled Sociological Approaches to Gender Justice. This is sponsored by the International Sociological Association. And if you've seen our webinar announced online, know that you are part of the parallel events that are organized by NGO CSW to what is now the 70th session of the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, which is now in session. I'd like to thank my NGO CSW team, as well as my colleagues at the ISA and our panelists. And I give special thanks to Dawn Bickno-Thomas and Pilar Laroulé, with whom I've collaborated on our feminist approaches to justice events at NGO CSW70. This is one of 5 panels that we are organizing on the topic of access to justice. We are thankful to Dominique Austin here, a doctoral student at John Jay College of Criminal Justice with me, for assisting us with publicity, as well as taking the lead on compiling our resource list for CSW70. Every year at CSW70, our 3 NGOs, including the ISA, the World Society of Victimology, Criminologists Without Borders, and the American Society of Criminology Division of International Criminology, produce a list of relevant UN documents and research publications related to the priority theme of the CSW. It is loaded on the Whova platform, which many of you perhaps are on and learn about our event that way, and Dominique is going to put it in the chat right now. It's a very extensive list, and I think many people will find it helpful as they delve into the work of the United Nations and also learn about relevant sociological research. The panel today, as I said, is one of 5 coordinated by our team. I have a short introductory PowerPoint, which Dominique will also put in the chat. And you will see in there the other panels listed, as well as the QR codes for joining them. So we had 2 panels in person this week. This is our 3rd panel. And we have 3 panels, including today's, that are webinars. 2 next week, one of which will be moderated by my colleague Pilar Laroulé and will be all in Spanish. We will be guest editing a special issue of the Journal of Crime, Law, and Social Change with the best papers from all these panels. This will be the 7th time we have guest edited a special issue of an academic journal to showcase the scholarship of the CSW. So our purpose in our parallel events is always to bring researchers to the fore, to have them engage with the work of the CSW, and also to have the audience of the CSW, whether it's member states or UN staff or other activists, to have them learn a little more about relevant research. These are the past special issues that we have edited. They're all different journals, and they all feature different priority themes. So you can find these issues online either by looking at the QR codes. And again, Dominique will load this very brief PowerPoint in the chat, so you have it as a resource. I am Rosemary Barbary. Let me introduce myself. I'm the moderator of this panel. I'm a professor of international criminal justice at John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York City. I serve as senior representative to the UN for the International Sociological Association, and I've been following the work of the CSW as well as the work of the Crime Commission for nearly 20 years. The main sponsor of this panel is the International Sociological Association, and this is the first time we have done 2 panels at the CSW. We're doing that in large part to flood the CSW this year with plenty of feminist research, to push back against the pushback, and also to recognize that within our very large organization of more than 6,000 members, there are many, many people who are researching issues related to gender equality and women. The ISA was founded in 1949 under the auspices of UNESCO. It represents sociologists everywhere to advance sociological knowledge and practice throughout the world. Its more than 6,000 members come from 126 countries, and the ISA enjoys a status of non-governmental organization in formal consultative status with ECOSOC of the UN and also is affiliated with the UN Department of Global Communication. It publishes 2 journals, International Sociology and Current Sociology, and its magazine, Global Dialogue, is translated to 18 languages, with 3 languages being the official languages of the ISA, English, French, and Spanish. The ongoing scientific activities of the ISA are carried out through 69 research committees, working groups, and thematic groups. And every 2 years, the ISA either hosts a World Congress or a forum. We encourage all of you here who are sociologists or interested in sociology to become a member, and Dominique will load a membership information in the chat. Today's panel includes 7 presentations. Dominique will place our program and speaker bios in the chat. And here you have the rundown of the program today. So we have relatively short presentations. Panelists are keeping their speaking to 10 minutes each so that we can take questions afterwards. We are recording this session, so if you do not wish to be seen or heard in the recording, please turn off your video and use the chat for questions. And now we will start with the first presentation from Marian Orjuela from Heidelberg University, Amazonian Women's Power, Eco-Solidarity in the Pursuit of Gender and Environmental Justice. Marian, you have the floor. And you need to unmute.
Now?
Yes.
Can you, yeah, okay. Can you see the presentation?
Yes,
also?
You might want to put it in presentation mode. There you go. Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Check the time. Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here with you today as a doctoral researcher from Heidelberg University and as a woman from the Amazon region. I would like to share with you part of my ongoing research about eco-solidarity in the pursuit of gender and environmental justice, something that has been called Amazonian Women's Power. So I will begin by presenting a quote from an interview I conducted in 2024 with a woman who defends the environmental and human rights in the Colombian Amazon. The name is Sandra. Sandra says, we don't just defend the right to live in a territory free from pollution. We also defend caring for others, and being cared for. Together, we are like a river, we are the united jungle. This is what Sandra said to me during one of many conversations that we had. And she is one of the large group of women who have decided to join together and form grassroots groups to defend the right to live, freedom of expression, equality and no discrimination, right to food, right to a healthy environment, amongst many others. This research has taken place in the Colombian Amazon, where armed conflict and environmental context has been major factor that change the way people connect with their land. Let me present the context quickly. Colombia has been a country affected by a long history of armed conflict, even through the FARC and the Colombian government signed a peace agreement in 2016. Recent years has been new armed confrontation. The Amazon is one of the most impacted areas with a very little state presence at the heart of environmental conflict. A new fight for territory, extractivism industry, illegal loggings, overuse of natural resource, expanding cattle ranch, illegal road crops, and environmental destruction have led to more poverty, violence, and insecurity in the Amazon. Women and children are the most affected, of course. The Colombian Amazon covers 42% of the country's territory and comprised mainly of 6 departments. I chose Department of Caquetá because It is not the only most populated area of the Amazon region, comprehend 430,000 population, I think, but also one of the most accessible because of the region unique characteristics, the challenging access to both territory and information, the security concerns and trust building with the community needed for this work. My research took a qualitative approach, and the transdisciplinary method put the community at the center and include participant observations, semi-structured interviews, and focus groups using techniques such as word circle and knowledge dialogue, círculo de palabras y conocimiento, diálogo de conocimiento, and that we co-developed with the participants. I also use ethnographic because I consider my own position as a woman born and raised in the region. Oh, I need to, sorry. So for more than 24 months, I work with a women's platform and a network of grassroots organizations that come together under a large umbrella that make their work visible and extend their network to the whole region. There are more than 50 organizations, mostly led by women who identify themselves as peasant farmer, campesinas, indigenous women, Amazon trans women, women from Africa descent, former women's combatants and peace signers, and migrant women, and women who have been victims of forced displacement. Some of these women's leaders and defenders of human rights and the environmental have taken an active part in protests, public demonstration, and community activities become the most visible face. Because of this, they have become recognized by many actors and have faced various types of violence. They have been target of insults, stigmatization, indirect threats. Other incidents include physical attacks, and the most critical point become murder victims. In addition, many of them also face multiple forms of aggression within their own families, and in society at large, they are often intimidated to keep them from participating in politics and decision makings at the local level. Okay. Okay. Local. Okay. For these women, the fight for gender and environmental justice is directly connected to building peace and protecting the Amazon rainforest. For members of the platform, seeking justice means looking for dignity, finding adequate space where their voices are heard and have influence in their communities. Seeking justice also means fighting for the recognition of the Amazon as a woman who has rights. Seeking justice is working together for peace in the Amazon. Okay, this is how in the pursuit gender and environmental justice, women have led women have developed and shaped and adapted their own strategies based on eco-solidarity to reduce and prevent the impact of many forms of violence, such as structural, political, symbolical, and gender violence. So because of time constraint, I can explain each strategy in depth, but I have chosen 3 eco-solidarity strategies that I mentioned in my doctoral thesis. The first one I call local pedagogy and andragogy for eco-peace. This means some groups of women in Caquetá have created community learning space in their areas. This include leadership training and empowerment workshop for women to defend the Amazon, as well as training in popular economy and solidarity, political participation, promoting cultural initiatives, and developing social ecological projects. This eco-solidarity strategy is essential in keeping the community support network active, dignifying women's collective work, and strengthening local activities. The second eco-solidarity I called Seed Women. seed women, is led by women by sometimes identify themselves as guardians of the forest, the mother jungle, Madre Monte, cares of the Manigua, the Amazonia, and Amazonian women. The rescue, preservation, and care for native seeds has been central to protecting food sovereignty in the region. Networks of solidarity have formed amongst peasant women and men who share local knowledge, barter, and exchange seeds. This has greatly helped to reduce hunger in rural areas, preserve the Amazon rainforest, and provide a sustainability alternative for economic support. Finally, solidarity homes. I call the third strategy Solidarity Homes. This is basically a protection strategy for women who defend human and environmental rights, especially those who have faces violent threats and violent physical and psychological violence. Usually, they seek shelter and support together with their children because the threats have a gender focus. Due to the lack of response for the stakes, where legal system or institution in part of the country often act slowly or poorly, these women have organized a space within their own homes and receive such case. Will they try to connect with the authorities and get support from NGOs and the regional gender board? This board, the General Gender Board, has been part of the result of the work done by Women's Platform and work with the Ministry of Justice of Colombia. Finally, why do we need to understand the Amazonian women's power? It is not just about looking at why women keep organizing collectively, even when their lives are at risk. The focus of this research is on how they have chosen to move forward using eco-solidarity strategies for care and protection, strengthening their collection action. These strategies I also help understand an organic system of care where support networks are woven together. Despite internal difference and challenges, these networks manage to work collectively at the same time, not only for social justice, but also for gender justice. At the same time, the relationship with nature is so deep. So gender justice from them also means justice from the Amazon, from the Colombian Amazon region. So with this research, I aim to highlight the work these women have been doing for years. I want to align the concept of eco-solidarity as a transformative mechanism with a gender focus coming from the global south, and to show the importance of seeking more inclusive academic space where discussion about historically marginalized and vulnerable places and populations like the Amazon can take place. Thank you.
Thank you, Marian, for that very interesting presentation on grassroots movements that aligns not only with gender equality, but also many other of the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you. We will now move on to the next presentation from Huimei Liu from Zhejiang University in China. When protection becomes predation, legal accountability gaps for sexual harassment of vulnerable women in clinical and leisure support settings. And I have your PowerPoint here, so I'm going to retrieve it for you. Just let me know when you want me to share slides. And
okay. So good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Rosemary Barbaret and also Professor John Fries for both of you having me here on this meeting. This is the first time for me to join this meeting and also the first time for me to discuss about the gender injustice from my perspective. So that's maybe some initial thoughts, and I would very much welcome your criticism and also your support. So here I don't like to read the title of my presentation today. So, I would like to cover the points like the background literature review and all the other sections. First of all, I also would like to introduce myself briefly. So my research focus is on culture and leisure studies. So I was awarded a Fulbright scholarship and visiting Penn State University, and also a visiting scholar to the Alberta University. So I was an co-managing editor of the Journal of Leisure Studies and the associate editor of the Journal of Leisure Sciences and the Journal of Leisure Research. So 2 years ago, I was also elected as the vice president of RC13, that is the Leisure Studies Research Committee. And I'm also the president of my provincial leisure studies. So that's a brief introduction about myself. And I also would like to take this opportunity to introduce a little bit about my city and my university. Please go next PowerPoint. Yeah, then the city of Hangzhou. Next, please. So I go through to my PowerPoint quickly. So my city, Hangzhou, actually is 1 hour from the city Shanghai. It's the capital city of my province. And about 800 years ago, the famous Italian traveler Marco Polo said Hangzhou city is a heaven city. It's the finest and most splendid city in the world. So actually at that time, 800 years ago, there are more than 1 million people living in the city. So next, please. My city is also a city of cultural heritages. It's quite unusual that in one city we have 3 World UNESCO heritages. That is West Lake and Grand Canal and archaeological ruins of an ancient city. So that's a very cultural rich. Now next PowerPoint. Our city is also a city of high tech. Maybe you have heard about Alibaba. So Alibaba is headquartered in my city, and maybe you have also heard about DeepSeek, Brainco, and the most famous robot company, Unitree. So all these high-tech companies were headquartered in my city. So next PowerPoint is just a little bit about my city. My university. It's one of the most prestigious university in China, and it ranked 39th or 49th according to different ranking system. So the latest one is that too, 39th or 49th. And we have the most comprehensive subjects. We have all kinds of subjects. So it's both artistics, humanities, philosophies, and technology, etc. Now I would like to come to next PowerPoint. It's about my research background. There are actually more than 95 million Chinese people face the depression. Among this population, 2/3 of them are women. So a large proportion of Chinese women are faced the trouble of depression. And when they are pursuing professional support, like professional consultancy from the psychologist or therapist, quite a proportion of them were, they were faced the problem of being sexually assaulted or violence. And this is a topic which have not been thoroughly explored in China. And I guess there is a long way to address this problem. So today I just want to bring up this issue from my perspective. So the research purpose or research question basically is to explore them. Yeah. Next, a little bit about literature review. So first, the literature review is about the vulnerability of this special population. They are facing lots of mental health issues, particularly the depression. So these female clients, they are in a context which like the safety, the intimacy, and all the other issues were threatened. So this is a quite vulnerable population, and we need the robust protective measures to help them. So this is a vulnerability. And the next is the boundary violation. So when they are quite weak, they are eager to have a safe place for the therapist or psychologist who can hear, can listen and to care for them. And when they are offered or they got provided this kind of support or assistance, sometimes it's easy for them to confuse develop a romantic feelings for therapists, and this will, of course, easy to cross the boundary. So this is a boundary violations. And the next literature review is a little bit, next page, please, is about the imbalanced power. So as the psychologists are the authoritative and they are knowledgeable, they are kind to provide support. So in this case, the psychologist or therapist are in a position of being much powerful and in control. So the last page of literature review is data from POP in 2001. And according to his research, number, that is quite a percentage of male therapists report having sex with clients. Now, so the latest data in 1994, there are still more than 3.9. So in 1977, there are more than, and is the situation in China is also true. So that's a little bit about the literature review. And for my method for this, I use the case studies. So I analyzed the 6 most frequently discussed and nationwide discussed cases. So this ranged from 2012 to last year. And all in these cases, the victims are females, are males, the vulnerable population or the vulnerable group. And the psychologists are all male. So these females got hurted or assaulted to different degrees. So I got to the last section is finding and discussion. So my first finding is actually in these 6 cases, 4 of them. So one is pending. The latest one in last year was not having a verdict yet. So the majority of them was not punished legally. And one of them is only got expelled from the system, I mean, an online system, but that's the only punishment. And he continued to provide consultants to other clients. So actually, he could still do that. And we actually in China, we don't have a law on this situation yet. We only have a code. We call it the Chinese Code of Ethics for Clinical and Counseling Psychology. So in this code, ethic code, we have a clear stipulation that is 1.8. So psychologists should not engage in any form of sexual or intimacy relationship with their clients. But this is ethical, so there is no enough legal legal measures. And the second is the victims did not receive not only receive inadequate support either from the legal support and also the public opinion. That is quite terrible. So some members even went so far to blame these victims. And the third is the victims have a strong sense of guilty. And the number four is that family face. So they said if they report this situation, the family or their own face will be damaged. So some in the first case, they would like to hide and not report to the police. So another finding, this is also the similar, I think, to your countries. So the abuse of power and control and the empathy transference. So these are the main findings of those cases. Maybe from Chinese culture, the guilty, the loose face, or the public opinion criticism, all these are to much a greater degree in China than in some other countries. So the last PowerPoint, the conclusion is that really there is not enough legal support for this group of people. And the last PowerPoint is the last one is good news is just yesterday. I mean, we have the fourth session of the 14th National People's Congress, which is concluded yesterday. So during this Congress, some representatives call for to have the enactment of a mental health law. So this indicates there will be an improvement for Chinese society to help this vulnerable group. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful presentation on a topic that is not very well explored, not very well researched, under researched certainly in UN fora, and I think an important contribution to access to justice and what we're discussing this year at the CSW. Our next presenter is Sheila Katz from the University of Houston on global perspectives on the feminization of poverty, and she is joined today also with her colleague co-editor. Sheila, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you so much. Let me put this into the slideshow. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, my name is Sheila Katz. I'm an associate professor at the University of Houston in Houston, Texas, and I have been working on women's poverty. I'm interested in adult women's poverty. And so our presentation today will be talking about a project that we have been working on for about the last 3 years. And my colleague, Laura.
Hi, I'm Laura Livesey. I am an adjunct faculty member in the sociology department of University of Houston downtown in Texas as well. My research interests center around gender studies and the intersection of technology and labor, but I have a particular focus on how occupation and gender perceptions or influence perceptions of job insecurity. So I was really excited when Sheila told me about this project and asked me to come on board.
Okay. And so you'll be hearing from both of us in our session today. I want to tell you a little bit about how this project got off the ground. This presentation is not meant to be a commercial for our upcoming book. It's meant to focus on the meta-analysis that we did of the essays that were contributed for the book project. And so the end result of this project is the International Handbook of Women in Poverty, Global Social Justice Essays. And in this volume, 25 essays from 20 countries with the perspectives of 36 authors contribute to this question that we all grapple with, and that is, how does women's poverty and inequality vary by country or by continent, region, and level of development? So, as the editors of this project, we put the call out for proposals, and people submitted proposals from all over the world. We accepted the proposals and then worked collaboratively with the authors to they developed their essays. We gave them feedback. They developed them some more. And in giving them feedback, Laura and I started doing a meta-analysis of all of the research presented. And so what we're interested in is focusing on local voices of poverty and women's experiences in daily life, and then moving that to thinking about more global themes. So I have just a brief introduction about the project, and then we'll tell you a little bit more about the meta-analysis. So I started thinking, I gotta put on my reading glasses because I'm now over 40. I started thinking about this project as the world emerged from the COVID-19 global pandemic. I began traveling again for work and pleasure in June of 2021. On these trips, I do what I usually do. I talk to people. In the first 3 years after the pandemic, I asked practically everyone I met about how they got through COVID-19. I asked how their family life changed, how their economic situation changed, how their work or education or children's education changed, what hardships they experienced, what joys they experienced. And from the vast variety of answers, I started focusing on women's economic experiences. After all, this is my expertise. What are women's lived experiences specifically regarding economic survival during and after the COVID-19 pandemic? So the picture that's on the screen is from the San Antonio Women's Collective. It's a Mayan community inland in Brazil. And during my first post-pandemic trip, I traveled to Belize with EF Go Ahead Tours in July of 2021. Belize had just barely started coming out of travel restrictions imposed during the pandemic, and widespread tourism had not quite returned. The cruise ships were not running yet. Many hotels remained closed, but EF decided to restart their small group tours. I was on their second tour post-pandemic, and in a small bus with 15 other travelers, the bus driver, and our tour guide, we traveled around Belize. However, in addition to like snorkeling and stuff and touristy things, the tour also included many cultural visits to communities, learning local traditions, trying to make local crafts, eating local foods, and talking with residents. So one day we visited an indigenous Mayan women's collective, and the women invited us to learn about their lives. They taught us about their traditions of local herbal medicines. They took us on a walk around the community to identify and taste plants. They showed us their pottery studio, and several of us tried throwing a pot on their pottery wheel. We learned to make corn tortillas and chocolate, and we had lunch in their community center, eating vegetables grown from their community garden, as well as chicken from the chickens they raised around their workshops. As the Mayan women showed us their community, their crafts, and their cooking, we wound up chatting. We talked about our life in respective cultures, what experiences were similar, what were different. And somehow discussing the pandemic just broke this ice. We had all just lived through this global threat, and talking about that survival brought about a kind of cross-cultural rapport. As a sociologist, I'm interested in how women live their daily lives. Therefore, during the day's activities, I engaged in several conversations with the community host about the pandemic time. Our host told us about how their community of Mayan women survived the pandemic both economically and medically. They showed us the herbs they used for indigenous medicines to boost immune systems and hoped that it would keep the virus away from their village. Their area did, in fact, have lower rates of infection and deaths than other areas of Central America. They were also rather remote. But the main part of the story is their economic survival. They worked as a community to try anything they could to meet the basic needs of their families and community until tourism reopened. They expanded the community garden and their chicken flock to feed more families without needing money to buy imported food. They taught the children's school outside so the kids could socially distance and be in fresh air. They started selling some of their products online. And the women I talked to agreed that it was a very lean couple of years economically, but that the community effort to help all families in that area made a big difference. By June 2021, the Artisan Collective and Community Center finally reopened to tourists, and ours was one of the very first tour groups to come through. I wanted to ask, and they wanted to talk about what it took to survive a pandemic. Standing in their garden that day, I wanted to listen. This project started to emerge from that conversation. But like many sociologists, I understood my positionality and my privilege, and I wanted to coordinate a different type of project. I wanted to center this project on local experts who write about their programs, their communities, and their research. And so it wasn't until about 2 years later in Nairobi, Kenya, while I was attending another conference, that I really sort of began getting to this project off the ground. And so in this project, we ask, what are the links between women's experiences in poverty, and how do those relationships, similarities, and contrasts tell us about the effects of poverty globally, and how we can work together to end global extreme poverty and definitely improve women's equality. Trying to now. Okay, so the 5 dimensions that we found in the handbook is that are part of women's poverty globally is, of course, women's responsibility and extensive caregiving for children, the disabled, and elderly. Continued gendered wage inequalities and gendered work opportunities, experiencing gendered violence, trauma, and abuse. Women worldwide have less access to healthcare, clean water, and nutrition, and less access and support for education, especially at the secondary and higher education levels.
Okay, I'm going to take this portion from here. This is an overview, basically, of all of the essays or all the voices of people that we received essays from across the globe. So just a quick run through is the stars indicate the places where people are writing about their regions. So we've got a decent span. We've got Hawaii, the continental US, Canada, Mexico, Brazil, Nigeria, Tanzania, as well as Armenia and Croatia, North Macedonia, Slovenia, we've got 2 from India, the Philippines, and Indonesia, as well as Vietnam. So that is our main overview. And I'm going to go over the meta-analysis finding number 1, which was that women's healthcare access is gender justice. And across the essays, we found a consistent through line related to women's health vulnerabilities. So women have the most healthcare needs, yet they are the most underserved when it comes to receiving care for those needs. So that's the case from we identified that was the case from highly developed national healthcare systems like those in Western Europe and Canada to crisis zones and war-torn places like Gaza. Overall, we found that women have all the healthcare needs of men, of course, but their healthcare experiences also include biological aspects related to reproduction, as well as those related to women's social positions. And that includes expectations related to caregiving and unpaid domestic work, which often come with additional weight on the body and on the mind, and a lot of consequences for opportunity in the human experience in general. So conclusively, we found that women need better access to healthcare if they're going to work towards justice overall, and maintain a place of stability and move forward. Sheila?
Okay. The second thing is women and girls need better access to education. And this is particularly true at the post-secondary, secondary and post-secondary. And as I know from the research that I did in my first book, Reformed American Dreams, these are some of the pictures from the participants who were receiving U.S. welfare benefits, so cash assistance for low-income mothers. And they were also enrolled in college. To almost every essay from the United States mentioned access to not healthcare, sorry, education for women and girls. but also both essays from India, the essay from El Salvador, um, both essays from the Philippines, from Indonesia, that this, just like improving access to various aspects of healthcare, improving access for women and girls to secondary and post-secondary education was a consistent and dominant through line. So these are just two of our meta-analysis findings. We'd love to go into depth on more of them, but because of time, I just wanted to sort of discuss the three key points of this research project. And so from the essays that were submitted and from the conversations that we've had with the authors about poverty in their community is that women's poverty, I know from this has been one of the through lines of the conference so far these 2 weeks, is that women must be counted, that we need to improve the data collection for women's to show women's poverty. We need to listen to women. So not only do we need to count them, but their voices need to be part of the process. And then we also need to understand women from their perspectives. And so that is part of the listening, is not trying to put our own external frames onto their poverty, onto their experiences with economic insecurity, but to understand it from their perspective. So collectively, we can uncover what is needed or what is not needed instead of trying to fix something, like the Mayan women's example, that yes, it was very lean, but it built their community stronger. And so how we can decrease women's poverty and increase women's rights and justice from their perspective, but on a global scale. That's us. Thank you so much for listening to our presentation. This picture was taken the day before. This was the big writing push day to get the book in. And Laura and I and our research assistant Savannah want to thank you for our presentation. And if you have any questions for us, our individual email addresses are on here. But womenspoverty@gmail.com is the address for the overall research project. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you both. You're welcome to put your emails in the chat as well for people that might want to contact you. This is great feminist sociological research. We've made a big effort this year on our own panels to include lived experiences, so we really appreciate your bringing those voices to the fore. The next presentation is Higher Education and Gender Equality by Natasha Quadlin from the University of California, Los Angeles. Natasha, you have the floor.
Great, thank you so much. Oops. Okay. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Natasha Quadlin, and I'm an associate professor of sociology at UCLA. And I teach classes on gender inequality and also gender and work. And my research is broadly about gender inequality in access and returns to education. So in other words, inequalities in who's able to enroll in and complete higher education, and then also inequalities in the economic returns that people receive on account of higher education. And today I'm going to be talking about this last part, so gender inequalities in the economic returns received from higher education. I see these issues as very much interrelated with the topic of justice. So in my view, and in the views of many other scholars, justice occurs when people receive equal rewards for equal training and work. So inequalities in returns to higher education are an important aspect of gender justice that affect a large segment of the population. I want to start out by giving a quick overview of men's and women's average returns to different levels of education in the United States. So this graph shows the average lifetime earnings for both men and women at a range of education levels. So at the bottom, we have those with less than a high school education, and at the top, we have those with a professional degree, so an MD or a JD, etc. And there's a few trends that are readily apparent when we look at this. So for example, there's a steep increase in lifetime earnings across levels of education, which we would expect. We also see that at every level of education, men's average earnings are substantially higher than women's average earnings. And there's a couple other points in particular that I want to highlight around this. So the first is that men with some college earn approximately as much as women with a bachelor's degree. So if men start but don't complete college, they can expect their average lifetime earnings to be roughly equivalent to women who do complete college. The second is that in order to earn as much as men with a bachelor's degree, women have to earn a PhD on average. So women have to complete substantially more education to achieve parity with male bachelor's degree recipients. So all of these trends represent substantively large inequalities. But when I show graphs like this to my undergraduates or when I give presentations to members of the public, their first response is usually to say, well, women are receiving different types of education. So in other words, if we especially look at people who attended and or completed college, women are choosing fields of study that aren't as lucrative. And this is a perfectly reasonable explanation for the gender wage gap among college graduates. And there's a lot of reasons that sociologists would object to an explanation like this. But today I want to briefly discuss the paper I wrote to essentially address this explanation. And the paper is called Higher Education and High Wage Gender Inequality. It was published in the Journal of Social Science Research in 2023. My co-authors are Tom Van Huvelen. He's an excellent social stratification scholar at the University of Minnesota. And then Caitlin Ahern, who was formerly a graduate student at UCLA and now is a social scientist at Meta. And this paper essentially asks, what are the largest gender wage gaps that have emerged today? I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. And then to what extent do gender differences in fields of study account for those very large gender wage gaps? Okay, so first I'll explain what I mean by the largest gender wage gaps. So scholars of stratification have identified a shift over time in the types of inequality that have dominated wage trends in the United States. In the 1960s, when we first start our analysis, the largest gender wage gaps were among those with a high school degree or less. So we see this on the left panel of the graph. The dotted line at the top is gender parity, so when men and women have equal wages. And in the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s or so, we see very large wage gaps between men and women with a high school degree or less. So men with this level of education were earning far more than their women counterparts. Over time, however, these wage gaps have shifted such that there are much larger gender wage gaps among those with a bachelor's degree or more. These are on the right side or the right panel of the figure. And more specifically, the gender wage gap has been concentrated among those with the very highest wages. This is the orange line that I've highlighted. This is people at the 95th percentile of wages. So over this time period, what we've seen is that men with the highest incomes have gradually distanced themselves from women with the highest incomes. And these comparisons represent the largest gender wage gaps in the US today. So as a result, we want to focus on comparing the highest earning men and the highest earning women who've received bachelor's degrees. So what does this have to do with fields of study? Well, first, we can look at the fields of study that tend to have these very high wage returns. I know you can't read all these fields of study. I'll zoom in a second. But what we are essentially showing here is, what are the majors that are producing people with very outsized pay? If we look at the highest paid people within each of these fields of study, which of these majors are really heading into the stratosphere in terms of pay? And so we zoom in on the top of this figure where we have, so the 95th percentile of wages is highlighted in blue. And these are the majors with the highest mean pay at the 95th percentile. So they're economics, chemical engineering, chemistry, biological sciences, finance, international relations, accounting, and mathematics. So many of these majors, of course, are male dominated. We can determine that just by looking at them. We're all, in higher education, although not all of them. So biological sciences is female dominated, and women are also really well represented in international relations and also accounting. But what we next show is that it's these very high paying majors where we're seeing the largest gender wage gaps. So on this graph, typical major pay is going from left to right. The lowest paying majors are plotted along the left. The highest paying majors are then, we're going through the highest paying majors on the right. And then we observe the gender wage gaps among people with the lowest pay. This is at the 10th percentile. People with median pay, they're at the 50th percentile. And then people with the highest pay, this is the 95th percentile. And so we can see this gap very clearly at the top of the figure. This very large wage gap that's emerging it's both among the highest paying majors, and it's also at the very top of the wage distribution. So in the most lucrative majors, the highest paid men are really pulling away from the rest of the population, and this is contributing much to gender wage inequality. The final piece of this that I want to highlight is what would happen if women shifted their fields of study? Could women close these very large wage gaps simply by choosing a different field of study, like a high-paying field of study? Or would these wage gaps remain even if women shifted into these high-paying majors? And so what we're looking at here is results from what's called a decomposition. And a decomposition allows us to basically assess how much of a gender wage gap is due to composition. So in other words, men and women are concentrated in different fields of study, versus what are called wage effects. So in other words, men and women are paid differently for reasons that we can't really account for. And what we see here is that at really high wage levels, this is precisely where the composition effect breaks down. So the effect of men and women being in different fields of study. For those with middle or even fairly high wages through about the 80th percentile or so, gender wage gaps are really well explained by fields of study. So if women change their field of study, they might be able to close the gender wage gaps at the median or the 75th percentile. But among the highest wage earners, these are the people who are contributing most to contemporary wage inequality trends. This is much less about composition. Instead, this is where wage effects begin to become important again. So at the 90th percentile and above, gender wage gaps become much more about men receiving outsized pay for reasons that are more or less unexplained. So as a result, we conclude that women couldn't close the largest gender pay gaps simply by shifting their fields of study. Instead, these wage gaps emerge because the highest paid men are receiving far higher pay than women could ever expect to receive, even if they majored in those fields of study. So I'll close with some takeaways from this paper, a few quick ones. So first, we find that the largest gender wage gaps sit among the highest paid workers, and these high wage gender wage gaps are really driving contemporary inequality trends. Second, we find that these wage gaps are not generally due to field of study differences, but instead they're due to what we and others have called discriminatory pay setting. This is essentially when an employer decides to pay someone much more than would be expected given that person's education and work experience. And discriminatory pay setting occurs in workers' favor far more often for men than for women. And then finally, I want to close with the idea that discriminatory pay setting happens when we think that some groups are inherently more deserving or more worthy than others. Much research in sociology shows that men are readily perceived as brilliant, as leaders, and as thought leaders within their organization. And these types of judgments are much harder to come by for women. So it's very important to know about these underlying biases because they lead to the situation that we've described in which men receive outsized pay for reasons that have very little to do with their qualifications. My email's here. If I have any questions or if I can send anyone anything, I'm happy to do so. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Natasha, for that fantastic and very clearly detailed quantitative presentation. I think you've given us a lot to think about in terms of educational inequality and also access to economic justice. For those of you who perhaps joined us late, we'll have questions at the end, but please feel free to use the chat for comments. Natasha, you may want to put your email in the chat for people to contact you. You can start putting your questions in the chat as well. We have 3 more presentations, and the next one is by Mairead Dunn and Barbara Crossoir, and they are from the University College Cork and also University of Sussex, and the title is Plus c'est la même chose. Take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, Rosemary. I'm going to say that the presentation we've got today links to some of the things that we've already talked about, so that's very reassuring. So well organized, Rosemary. We're calling this Plus c'est les mêmes choses, and this is a collaboration between myself, and I'm Mairead Dunn, and Barbara Crossoir, who's going to join us in a moment. We're going to start this with Barbara, who's going to take the first few slides, and then I'm going to come after her to finish off the presentation. So, Barbara, over to you.
Thank you. So delighted to be with you today. Starting with an overview of what we're going to discuss. Going to focus on gender and development policy commitments since the Commission on the Status for Women was established in 1946, and highlight the limited extent of change despite those major interventions that there's been. We'll critique the reliance of international policy and practice on quantification. And we'll trace historically how this was developed and how this results in produces a gender binary. And we argue that this gender binary frames and constrains development practices and priorities. And then we'll close with some suggestions for moving forward. So that's a brief overview of what we're going to address. So first of all, just to highlight the major international policy developments that there have been since the creation of the Commission on the Status for Women. Very importantly, of course, the Beijing Platform for Action in 1995, moving forward the Millennium Development Goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, and of course the creation of UN Women itself. These have been major policy interventions, but what changes have we seen as a result? Yeah. So of course, UN Women 2025 has highlighted we have seen changes. There have been, for example, these positive legal reforms addressing gender equality and gender justice. However, there are major gaps. And the World Economic Forum in 2025 highlighted that there is still a combined global average gender gap of over 30% across the four areas that they include as sub-indices, economic participation and opportunity, political empowerment, educational attainment, and health and survival. Analysing that in more depth, the World Economic Forum says that across all of these four sectors, it's going to take 123 years to close the gender gap. So we're very far from gender equality and gender justice. But very importantly, the gaps are significantly different across these four indices. Many contexts are now close to equality in the health and education sub-indices, but that is not translating into equalities in the economic participation and political empowerment sub-indices, where gender equality remains a distant horizon. Sorry, just skipped on there too soon. Jumping back. So gender-based workplace segregation, as we have just heard in the previous presentations, remains. And that leaves women still concentrated in lower paying, people-centric industries such as healthcare and care, and in education. So yeah, turning back now to Mairead, she is going to take us forward.
Yeah. So I guess the question now is, how do we know all this? And we're arguing that this is predominantly through quantitative data and selected outcomes, and these are used to produce hierarchies. I've got a clip from the Human Development Report at the top of this slide. And what we see is that data on health, education, and income are used, taken from country data, and this is used to produce an HDI index. This HDI index is there for every country, and these countries are listed in order of that HDI index to give us an HDI rank. So this HDI rank ranks all the countries across the world. And what you see, if you look closely at the rank, I mean, on the slide there, you can see we've got part of the a report, and it shows us a rank here. So Bhutan is 125 out of nearly 200 countries, and Tajikistan, for example, is 128. So we've got a rank order based on the data that come from health, education, and income. But what happens is, if we look at the top of this rank order, we will see that the countries at the top are all Western countries. And what this actually does in terms of development, it shows us something of a Western superiority. It produces deficit in countries who are lower down the order and suggests Western superiority. Importantly here, in terms of gender, which is what we're talking about today, none of the data that we have that's collected in the Human Development Report, for example, does anything to that human development rank. So that stays there as a master hierarchical rank order of countries across the world. Next one, Barbara.
Yep.
Okay, and what we're arguing that in the collection of this data, it is actually a misrecognition of gender. What it does is it reproduces and naturalizes a gender binary, male, female, and it objectifies and universalizes gender difference. And in this process, it flattens the difference between sex, gender, and sexuality. Indeed, the reporting of gender differences actually only focuses on outcomes. It doesn't tell us anything. For example, if we use the example of mean years of schooling, the data doesn't tell us anything about the contextually located social processes by which the outcomes are produced. So it doesn't tell us how the mean years of schooling are produced in context. And we are claiming that these statistics are technologies of power. They constrain how we understand and even can start to address gender. And as I have said previously, the use of fixed dimorphic gender categories, together with the focus on outcomes, is a form of objectification. That in treating one gendered type subject as undifferentiated from another, sustains misrecognition of being and becoming gendered. So, move on, Barbara, please. However, I'm talking about the HDI and I'm talking about 2025 reports, but there's a history to this. There's a history of the production of gender difference. And Pateman and Mills there say to us, accounts of differences between groups of people and between men and women began to develop in the 17th and 18th centuries, together with theories about stages of civilization. We might imagine stages of civilization as we look at the HDI rank, which puts countries into different levels of development. But what they're pointing to here is the emergence of liberal thought, and it's thought that emphasizes the individual subject. It emphasizes universal rights and equality. And this indeed has become the taken for granted common sense foundation of development and modernity. However, although some of that sounds very much in a positive light, we know that not all subjects were regarded as equal. Liberalism itself has produced multiple exclusions by gender, race, class, etc., etc. But what we see in this production of difference is the superiority, once again, of Western man. And this superiority, not only through the HDI records and data presentation, but also in development discourses, is sustained. Next, Barbara. I think you've gone one too far. Yeah, thank you. So what we're now returning this idea of how the data and the conceptualization of gender difference has been produced, but we're now pointing particularly to the gender elements of this. I'm quoting Mouffe, who says, liberalism constructed modern citizenship in the realm of the public, which was identified with men, excluding women who are confined to the private or the domestic realm. And this gendered private-public divide was established because women were regarded as the weaker sex, afflicted by their emotions, and therefore they were excluded from the public sphere. This gendered private-public divide actually renders women's work invisible from the public sphere. It undervalues their wage labour and reproduces a heteronormative gender binary in which women are subordinate. This is a sexual contract, and this sexual contract is vital for the working of capitalism. And dominant discourses of development fail to capture the contextually located ways in which the sexual contract and women's subordination are produced and sustained. As I said earlier, it might tell us an endpoint, a gendered endpoint, but it's not telling us about the contextually located ways that this sexual contract referred to here is produced and women's subordination is sustained. Next one, Barbara. And just to show that this is located in other literatures, we've put some juicy quotes. I'm not going to do those now, but they're there for you to have a look at later. Next one, Barbara. So, having said all this, having looked at the data, having looked at the dominance of quantification, and to look at the way that this misrecognizes actually what gender is, we are now going to suggest ways of moving forward. And these ways of moving forward, we're saying we need to move away from universal definitions of gender and to attend to context. We need to include the voices of women, local voices, especially women, to inform development policy and practice. Some of the speakers before were also active in this, which is really interesting. We need to focus on the ways that social institutions construct gender and sustain women's subordination. These social institutions include schools, families, legal systems, and development organizations. We need to develop a new language for thinking about gender and its implications for practice and policy. We also need to attend to the intersections of gender with other hierarchies of difference, including race, poverty, nation, religion, etc. And we need to take these newer understandings into our research and our practice methodologies. Okay, the final slide is just a list of references, and that's it. Thank you very much.
You both for giving us a very nice critical overview of the work that the UN does, certainly in producing statistics and its many indices. I think we're having a very good look at a broad array of sociological perspectives this morning. And I think you've given people a lot to think about in terms of how to measure inequality and what to take into account. And yes, it does resonate with many of the other presentations. So thanks to both of you.
Thank you.
We're now moving on to our male allies. We put them last. I don't know why actually we put them last, but we have two presentations left to go. The next presentation, we're moving to Ghana. We're going to hear from Daniel Kennedy-Amoah from Memorial University of Newfoundland on bridging the gender gap in legislative representation, lessons from electoral systems, quota laws, and women legislative representation. Daniel, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Rosemary. Good morning. So as Rosemary said, my name is Daniel Kennedy-Amoah. I'm a PhD candidate at Memorial University in Canada. My PhD examines urban informality, gender, and tax. And I bring new perspectives on how informality and gender is understood and framed through intersectional lens. But today, I'm representing on bridging the gender gap in legislative representation, lessons from electoral systems, quota laws, and women's legislative representation. So thank you so much for the opportunity to present my work to a global audience.
Daniel, you might want to put your presentation in view mode.
Oh, okay.
So if you go to view slideshow, we'll see your slides much better.
Okay, I got it.
Play from start at the very left.
Is this showing now?
There, perfect.
Okay, good. All right. So my presentation will be in 6 sessions. Hopefully it will be brief because of the allocated time. I will first give an overview and objectives of the study on women's legislative representation. I will then state the research question. I will move to the methodology to show how the data or the evidence for the study was conducted, after which I will discuss the theoretical framework or lenses through which the study was conducted, which is very, very important for this study. I will move on to look at the discussion. I will discuss the findings of the studies, and then I will conclude with sharing policy recommendations for women's legislative representation. Women continue to experience political and social inequality around the world, including underrepresentation in legislative or decision-making bodies. There have been efforts over the years in finding solutions to close the gender inequality gap. It is almost 50 years since the first World Conference on Women held in Mexico that came up with the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and 30 years after the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, which called for gender equality. However, women are still far behind in equal representation and participation in major decision-making process when compared to their male counterparts. So women currently constitute 27.5% of all members in legislative bodies in the world. According to the 2025 Global Gender Gap Report by the World Economic Forum, at the current rate, it will take about 130 years to reach gender equality in the highest position of power and 123 years to achieve gender equality. This is very disturbing. And so questions remain about the pathways to bridging the gender inequality gap in politics. And so my presentation has two important objectives. First, understanding how electoral systems and quota laws affect women's legislative representation through an international lens. Second, providing policy recommendations necessary for greater women's legislative representation in Ghana, as well as other countries that want to improve women's legislative representation and ensure gender justice. So let me give a bit of pictorial picture of women representation across the globe. In terms of regional averages, with the exception of the Americas and European countries, including Northern countries, which have achieved over 30% women's legislative representation, the other regions have recorded figures below 30%. The Interparliamentary Union data shows that there are only 77 countries globally in which women account for 30% or more of legislative representation in the lower house of the legislature. So important questions remain as to how this could be bridged. So I asked a very important question: how do electoral systems and quota laws affect women legislative representation? And to answer this question, I used a mixed method with a more qualitative research approach using secondary data for the study. The data or the evidence was gathered and analyzed from research databases and policy documents, legislative acts, government and government reports, such as the Electoral Commission of Ghana, the Interparliamentary Union, the International Institute of Democracy and Electoral Assistance, the Global Gender Gap Index by the World Economic Forum, UN Women, among others. So I draw insight from the critical mass theory and intersectionality to make arguments about challenges to achieving equality in legislative representation. And critical mass theory discusses differences in behavior in corporate organizations or workplace environments resulting from skill-sex ratios. Kantar suggests that the nature of group interaction depends upon size. So the argument is that in women's legislative representation, women are not likely to have a major impact on legislative outcomes until they grow from a few token individuals into a considerable minority of all legislators. Only as their numbers increase will women be able to work more effectively together to promote women-friendly policy change and to influence their male colleagues to accept and approve laws promoting women's concerns or gender justice. The second framework, I look at intersectionality and is the interaction of multiple vulnerabilities and privileges of gender, income, race, ethnicity, age, sexuality, and other categories of differences. And the outcome of these interactions in terms of power. So intersectionality is very essential for analyzing how women, particularly those from marginalized backgrounds, experience policies differently than men. The implication of these theories for today's study is that women in an attempt to win elections face multiple layers of disadvantage due to gendered labor divisions, culture, legal barriers, and societal expectations that reinforce other challenges. I'd like to give a brief overview of sociological, political, and cultural context of Ghana. The study focused on Ghana. I try to look at why women has been underrepresented in the legislature despite Ghana's democratic credentials. So Ghana is predominantly a patriarchal society, and patriarchy creates a system of men domination and women's subordination. Patriarchy practices and structures support women's subordination, which undermine their position at home, the labor market, and society. Poverty, employment, and corruption and inequality are development challenges in Ghana. This has resulted in uneven distribution of wealth and opportunities. So wealth and asset ownership is biased towards men, despite the fact that women constitute the highest number of the population, proportion of the population. Ghana has a fairly robust democracy since its political transition to multi-party democracy in 1972, with 9 consecutive elections. Despite Ghana's great encounters with elections, women have struggled to achieve greater legislative representation. Women representation in politics and policymaking process, both at the local level and the national level, are low. Currently, there are 41 women parliamentarians, which constitute 14.9% of the 276 seats in Ghana's parliament. And membership into Ghana's parliament is by simple majority. That's the first past the post electoral system. And also Ghana is a signatory to a number of important conventions, such as the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, the African Charter on Human Rights, Human and People's Rights, and then the Women's Protocol, among others. In Ghana, study shows that discrimination, marginalization, and historical experience repression go beyond gender to people from ethnic minority, less educated, people with less income or wealth, geographical location, other social background. While Ghana's constitution does not discriminate against the participation of women in politics, there has been the inability of women to lead successful campaigns for political positions, as I mentioned earlier. So this does not does not reflect Ghana's democratic credentials and the exemplary status it has been given in Sub-Saharan Africa. So the findings from this study shows that gender quota laws and proportional representation in electoral systems lead to increased women legislative representation. From the data set that I used, countries that have reached 30% and above in women's legislative representation use more of the PR system or some form of quota laws. And quota laws are more responsive to greater women's legislative representation when a PR electoral system is used. A country with a PR electoral system is more likely to use quotas. So that shows how essential, how important the PR system is. And under the majoritarian system, political parties select candidates based on ethnic, regional, and religious consideration, which they believe will win them political power. political parties have no systematic plan to select women candidates in their primaries under the magisterial electoral system, which currently Ghana is practicing. Another finding is that the magisterial electoral system is one of the most important factors that account for the low representation of women in Ghana's parliament.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for this deep dive.
I look at the conclusion.
One more slide. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I would like to conclude with some key takeaways and recommendations. So, like many other countries, challenges in Ghana's magisterial electoral system and the absence of effective gender quotas reinforce the challenges of inadequate financial means at women's disposal, unfavorable political parties' activities towards women legislative representation, and social cultural barriers, including patriarchal norms. Ghana and other countries that want to increase women's legislative representation should consider making reforms in the electoral system in favor of a more PR system or a mix of the PR and the Mediterranean electoral system. There should be an enforcement of effective gender quota laws. As we speak, Ghana has passed the Affirmative Action Law Act. The law has no consideration for women representation in parliament, and its success depends on effective enforcement. I strongly believe that these changes would compensate for any other challenges to women legislative representation. And let me briefly state that the importance of women legislative representation cannot be overemphasized. I mean, it will help ensure and strengthen access to justice for all women and girls by promoting inclusive and equitable legal system, eliminating discriminating laws, policies, practices, and addressing structural barriers, and thereby empowering women. The economic, social, and cultural conditions that tend to exclude women from politics in Ghana and many other sub-Saharan Africa, other global South countries are the result of, in part, legislative actions and national politics within the jurisdiction of parliament or the legislature. An increase in women legislative representation will help them to protect and advance their rights and secure opportunities by ensuring that they are enshrined in national laws and constitutions. So thanks so much for your attention.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank
you for this
Rosemary.
very thorough look at Ghana and a topic that is innovative and new to this panel, which is parliamentary representation, but certainly of interest to the eyes and ears of the United Nations, which has done quite a bit of work on this and includes it under one of its main indicators for the Sustainable Development Goals. Our final presentation will be from Sergei Konovalov. Sergei worked hard to join us in person in New York, but his visa was denied by the United States. So luckily we have a hybrid possibility for him to present his very interesting research on Kazakhstan. Sergei, you have the floor.
Thank you. Do you see my presentation or?
Not yet.
I have to load this.
There we go.
Do you see it?
Yes, just put it into presentation mode. The little icon, the little icon at the bottom that looks like a little tree there.
Yes. I don't figure out this. Do you see my presentation?
We see it, but we can see it bigger if you use presentation mode. I think it's also under a bid. View.
I'm sorry, I don't think I don't figure
That's
out
okay. You
now.
can go ahead. But I think at the top under BEAD, the drop-down menu that says BEAD, I think
The left
that's
side of
BEAD.
the left
It's
side of your screen.
in bottom green sign.
Yes, you are sharing. We can see your presentation. Why don't you just go ahead? You have to share again.
It's am I right? Gender justice.
Yes, go right ahead. We can see it. Go right ahead.
Okay. Sorry for this interruption, but
Нажмите на слайд-шоу наверху. У вас идет файл, главное, так далее, и потом слайд-шоу посередине наверху. Слайд-шоу. Да, нет, дальше. Нет, дальше идете. Вот слайд-шоу наверху написано.
окей.
Слева сначала. Еще левее.
Сначала, окей.
Мгм.
Okay.
Да.
There we go. Perfect. Go right ahead. Oh,
First of all, I would like uh, to thank Professor Rosemary Barbaret for this opportunity to present what now going on in Kazakhstan. And it's very far from New York. It's almost 10,000 kilometers. It's so far. And I'm immensely grateful for giving me this floor for presentation what we our achievement in this way. I'm especially grateful. I hope Jean-Marie Fritz is here, Professor. I'm especially grateful to Professor for her support and for remembering me despite that we have not seen each other almost 20 years. And it's undoubtedly a great happiness and privilege to be in contact with global angel leaders in this platform. My only regret, as you said, Ms. Barbaret, I only regret is that I was unable to attend this wonderful forum in person in New York, unfortunately. But thank you again for this opportunity to present some of our research and share our concerns, what we worry about. Today, I would like to share some of our results that we have achieved within projects dedicated to domestic violence, trafficking, and non-discrimination. The projects that we had involved during past 2 years. And I will try to present it very briefly because time limitation. Before moving on to the main part of the presentation, I'd like to talk about our identity. Of course, Kazakhstan remains a largely unknown country, sufficient known about our country in a global level. Although people know of its existence, they don't know our internal world because we exactly are between China and Europe, and that's why we need to explore what we are. Kazakhstan is often called the heart of Eurasia, and our territory is comparable to all of Europe. It should be understood, however, that Kazakhstan experienced a long period seemingly outside of history, and the continuity generations was interrupted by a long period of local wars in the Middle Ages and colonialism and Soviet communist period. After gaining independence in 1990s, Kazakhstan faced the challenge of national revival. It was it was related with revival and restore our identity, Kazakh identity. This proved difficult given the interruption of, as I said, of intergenerational continuity and the shift technological platform, because Kazakh people before the Soviet Revolution in 1917 was mostly nomadic people. And after that Soviet period and Tsarism, we survived significant changes in our economic and political systems. The main things, but come back in our the main topic in our webinar. The main thing that needed to be done was to reinterpret social roles. However, in society, not so simple, and the national revival took a conservative turn. This signified an attempt to return to historical past and restoration, and it brings us to restoration of male dominance and the re-establishment of a masculine pattern within the social system. And as a result, developing of society developed a set of social norms that presented an inaccurate interpretation of gender role. Actually, we don't have any implemented gender methodology in our legislation or in our political practices. And gender is more used in our rhetoric or scientific discourse. And we have to implement yet this gender methodology in our legislation, what we have doing, what have been doing, and in the last 2 years. And in this slide, you can see our, as we said, cultural legacy that we have, what we took from our past. And there are some traditions, what sacralized traditions, such as the bride price, on even bride kidnapping, on the transfer, this is brother's wife to his relative. It was our past that we have took from our traditions within nomadic lifestyle. With the Industrial Revolution and urbanization, all of this became a relic of the past. However, the national revival, within national revival, the past was sacralized, and everyone tried at all costs to reclaim it. And this is where we got double standards for men and women. It's our specific and particularities. The main guardian of the national conscious concept was Uyad. It's from Kazakh language. If we translate to English language, it roughly translated will be moral shame. Only this concept acts more as constraint on a woman's behavior, starting from her childhood, adolescence, up and lead up until her marriage. This Uyat essentially justifies male infidelity and condemns female infidelity, and idealized woman wife image was established one who devotes herself to her family, children, and husband, and not even dedicates herself, but merges with her family, husband, and anyone else. But girls strove to obtain a better education to better secure their future. Men could be content with this current education as they were the masters of this masculine-centric system. Unfortunately, this is our reality. And in this slide shows our key patterns in ensuring women's and girls' access to justice. This topic was presented in a Central Asian Forum held jointly by Kazakhstan and the OSCE last September in 2025. Currently, our delegation, led by the chairperson of the Constitutional Court, is participating in the forum in New York. I won't go into detail here. I'll just point out one pattern we encounter in the judicial and system and law enforcement system have bias that men are always more right than women. Men have higher status, women are emotional, and this is not inspire trust in our Northern mentality. Therefore, we transform institution first, then move on to substantive changes. And in response of it challenges, in 2024, the country passed or adopted a law criminalizing domestic violence. This happened again after 7 years hiatus. It happened, adaptation new law on regarding domestic violence. It was reasoned by egregious cases of violence against women, especially by wealthy men from the elite. It was explosion. The main amendments that were made to the legislation, articles on battery and intentional infliction of minor bodily harm, criminalization of harassment of persons, and 16 online and offline. Life imprisonment was introduced for the rape of a minor, resulting in death. Punishment was introduced for stalking and forced marriages. And the law's adoption resulted in sharp increase in the detection rate of domestic violence, approximately 3.5 times in 2024, when this new law was adopted, and this continued growth in 2025. Lawmakers continued their crackdown on domestic violence, criminalizing stalking and bride kidnapping. Accordingly, the rise in domestic violence cases is expected to continue, unfortunately. However, there are problems not only with gender stereotypes, but also with what's called bias law enforcement system, as I said. Since the police and law enforcement agencies are predominantly male, belong men, domestic violence attitude is from this law enforcement system is very bad. Courts prefer to consider such cases only in the context of divorce or property deviation, and this problem with consideration these cases in our courts. An analysis of trends shows that we must do something beyond legal measures. The principle of law and order that cultivated in the country is understood differently by government agencies and civil society, and the consensus to understanding right understanding this principle have to be achieved. We see ongoing domestic violence fueled by all traumas. Violence remain as the main tool for maintaining order. Unfortunately, it's common for all post-Soviet countries, unfortunately. As we must be saying that without deep cultural transformation, criminal law in domestic violence issue rather is more reaction rather than a solution. And we proceed from a very simple truth: the greater the gender imbalance, the less harmonious society will be. Our research has shown that the potential for female political leadership in Kazakhstan is right. However, for men, the phenomenon of female politician and especially female president is more than unacceptable. You can see in my presentation this. Against this backdrop, it is significant that despite the combined representation quota for women, youth, and people with disabilities, the proportion of women in parliament is only 18%. At the same time, Kazakhstan has commitment to provide no less as 30% representation of women in parliament and on decision-making level. There are only 2 female ministers in our government because we had not been targeted rise of women political representation in our strategical plan. Women operate in a male-dominated environment. If they become politicians, it's because they adapt to a male world. They don't enter politics with a feminine vision and goals. They simply survive. And women earn about a third less on average, but they also live longer. This hits a woman with a double whammy. On average, women live 8 years longer as men. This means they have to spend a significant portion of their lives without the partner they spent their entire lives with. Meanwhile, their pensions will be too small to provide them with a dignified retirement. And because pensions depend on the woman's last place of employment, since women dedicated their lives to their families and the husband who died, for example, they will receive the minimum pension. Thus, sociology has enabled us to implement projects to combat domestic violence in a way that shifts from repression and punishment to prevention. We understand that an aggressor can be both a victim and a savior, as per Cartman's famous drama triangle. One news brings me great happy, bringing tears to my eyes, maybe almost. The authorities in Kazakhstan have heard our voices finally, and literally on the eve of International Women's Day on March 8 this year, the creation of a commissioner or ombudsman for domestic violence issue in Kazakhstan was announced. It's established already. This was our recommendation based on the UK experience and some Western countries. The commissioner will operate within the framework of the National Commission on Women Affairs and Family and Demographic Policy under the President. The commissioner will regularly report to the president on the prevention of domestic violence. This will also mean ensuring women and girls access to justice. It also means monitoring investigations into specific cases of domestic violence. And in the end of my presentation, I would like to say what we expect in our what we have to do in further. The next steps we expect 4 major areas of action in the fight against domestic violence. First, further targeted legislative improvements. Second, the implementation of inclusive projects for the rehabilitation and resocialization of survivors of domestic violence. And third, the increased involvement of women in the police and other law enforcement agencies. Fourth, consistent outreach efforts through NGOs. Each of these areas is outlined on the slides. You can see it. With that, let me conclude my remarks. Thank you again for the invitation to participate in this forum. Warm greeting from Astana for you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergey, for this very detailed presentation. You've given us data, you've given us legislation, you've given us your own thoughts about proactive policies in the future. And I think a lot of us who knew very little about your country have learned quite a bit in these minutes that you presented to us. So everyone, this concludes our presentations for today. Sergey, if you can stop sharing, then maybe we can see everyone, and perhaps people could
Sorry,
use.
it was vibrating moment for me.
You got it.
It was first time when I participated in it's this sort kind of platform. Thank you.
Oh no, well done, well done. So now I've opened up the gallery so we can all see each other. Perhaps people could use the raise hand feature to pose a question or to comment. We have a bit of time left. I don't think we're actually going to be kicked off the Zoom, but I do know that our official ending time is 10:30 and people may be going to other events. So are there any questions for our panelists? Any questions for our panelists? Okay, in the chat, from Raga Elzian, how can sociological frameworks better integrate lived experiences from conflict settings where women's roles rapidly shift from marginalization to frontline community leadership? You'll see this question in the chat if you want to read it. Would any of our panelists like to tackle this one? Sheila, perhaps you have some of this in your handbook?
Yeah, so I was actually just thinking about this. That was one of the sort of disappointing things about the project is that despite our best efforts of recruiting, we we had authors from Iran and from Venezuela who, as the essays became due, the US decided to invade places that, and so they backed out because they were quite concerned about their own safety. And South Sudan was another one. And so that's you know, um, one of the things that we did, and I'll have Laura talk about for just a moment, but is we felt like so we decided to tackle Gaza, and we're not experts on Gaza at all, but we're sociologists. And so Laura, if you want to talk about that process, but the people who are in the middle of active conflict have the least amount of time to write sociological, academic or community-based writing. And so, like the process of being interviewed by reporters and things like that, it's less than perfect, but it's much better than nothing. So, Laura, do you want to?
Oh, yeah, I can add a little bit on that. Well, just from the research we did on Gaza as life in an active conflict zone where everything is turned upside down and suddenly um, the entire focus is on, basic survival, but especially the impact that it has on women who are doing much of the surviving um, and becoming heads of households. It's a very difficult situation, of course, as we can all imagine, but there are so many things that, in terms of getting anyone to be able to write and send things in, that would have just been a very difficult, it's just a very difficult situation. And the level of responsibility that is this shift from women having to uh, now not only care for their families and being sandwiched in between their children and parents and all the survivors of their family, but also needing to provide financially. And there's just so many increase. The thing that really stuck out was not just the pain of having to be a survivor, but also um, all the new vulnerabilities that go along with going out and having to provide for your family financially during a crisis period in which all the vulnerabilities that women usually face increase during that time, which is the absolute last time you would ever need those things to increase. But so yes, there's drastic shifts in terms of how much suffering um, is experienced, and then how many new responsibilities or additional responsibilities are placed on the shoulders of women who are also now without aid and goods and the resources that they need for basic drinking water to, feminine hygiene products. So, Sheila, did you
No, it's just it's a question that we grappled with and have imperfect answers to
Much so.
because and as sociologists we need to keep working to be able to help people in crisis zones document their experiences and connect them to international resources. So, thank you.
Anyone else want to add anything? Barbara?
Yeah, it's a really important question. I think going back to some of the arguments in our presentation, it's really important to think of what we are, both of us work in education, sociology is working in education. It's really important to think of the kinds of hypermasculinities that are being produced and legitimated through education and through the kind of patriarchies that liberalism has installed around the world. And to think more about the work of education in the ways those are that education might provide foundations for a notion of a more independent future where we recognize inequalities around the world more strongly rather than seeing the kind of triumphalisms of the West and the ways that conflicts are, by leaders of liberal democracies are being taken forward in ways that are flouting every principle that we stand for. There is something about the undermining of liberal principles that is really paradoxical. But yeah, the work of education I would highlight as something that's we need to think more of.
Okay. All right, thank you. We have a question from Sandeep Das. In socio-legal aspects, how should we prevent domestic violence in our society? So from a socio-legal perspective, how to prevent domestic violence in our society? Do you want to develop that at all, Sergey?
It's not so simple for our society actually, because as I said in my presentation, we have violence is the main tool for make order in our society. It's what we inherit from our Soviet communist period, unfortunately, and that's why now we have to overcome this practice in not it's practice in it's domestic violence, so violence within family. It's actually it's compensation for what we do in political level, in economic, and that's why a man feels a problem with his life and improvement in his life, and that's why he rise on hand on his wife. Unfortunately, it's our practice in our post-Soviet post-Soviet countries. But now what we now survive and what currently happening in our country, we you can see our constitutional reforms, and we reconsider our constitutional reform and included special norms dedicated to re-engineer our gender and the social process in our society, because it's not domestic violence is not what we have to see in lens of only domestic violence or legislature or maybe in legal lens. There is brought many problems that impacted and influenced in our mood, in our practices, in behavior of men and women. It's of course it's the main problems that what we have to do, and we need to bring sociological acknowledgement and sociological practices, Western practices on our ground and implement it. But there is problems that implementation face with problems that we bring good practices, best practices from Western countries, I mean, the US and Britain, Great Britain and France and European Union, for example. But there we need to know our ground, our society. And as you absolutely right said, Rosemary, dear Rosemary, and we insufficient, the world insufficient know about us, but there is problems that we don't know ourselves enough, because we now is transition society, and we mix society with problem with intergeneration continuity, and we inherit some bad and good practices from our generation, post-war generation, World War, Second War, and new generation, and now Zoomers, and now millennials, and there is now what we face and many problems with our intergeneration relationship. We don't know, we actually we don't know ourselves properly, and that's why. And I try as sociologist try to be involved in this platform, that we need to know gender methodology. Actually, I made my gender studies 20 years ago, 25 years ago, in 1990s. But my experience in this way was interrupted my public service experience in state bodies, in embassies and president office. And now I know good our public practices, and now I try to know, I try to explore our practices in civil society, and that's why I have a chance to implement something good and benign power, as I said.
Thank
when
you,
we are
Sergey.
saying about.
Thank you, Sergey. I think a lot of people here, certainly I will speak for myself, a lot of us feel that we do not know our own countries very well either. So that's a common sentiment, I think. I think we have time. Barbara, Murray, you wanted to say something?
Yeah. I just wanted to add that sometimes our attention is taken to critical and crisis situations, whereas in fact, as you were saying, Rosemary, we're not really sure of where we live in terms of gender relations and gender equalities. And I think we need to put our attention into the everyday. So every time we see something that we don't think is equal, I mean, we had this data on jobs. Who gets jobs and how they get paid. All of this needs us to react to it. And I know some people might think countries in the West are doing okay, but basically they're not. We don't have to look very far to see they're not. We can just go out on the streets and see how discriminatory practices go on all the time. And these ones need to be at the top of what we're thinking, as well as those ones which are about, ecofeminism, which are about women who are under particular stress because of poverty. But it's the everyday and it's the continued insertion of gender difference that we each need to tackle. That's all.
Yes, I think that's a wonderful point. And if we could take the last question here from Suzanne Hanchett to Maria Norhuela, please say something more about the eco-solidarity concept.
Thank you very much. It's just I need to connect the last question because I think it's important to talk about from the Amazon region and sociological approach involves rethinking how justice and access to right and currently understood in this region. And thank you for thanks everyone for their brilliant presentations. Yes, solidarity through a modern theoretical lens belongs to the community and acts as a force for social cohesion, moved by shared goals or challenges or social cultural dynamics. But more recently, recent debates link solidarity to ecology. And this is increasingly transdisciplinary literature to complex and interconnected relationship between people and nature during the Anthropocene and marked by growing climate crisis, social and environmental injustice, for example, and has encouraged the development of reciprocal perspective like ecological solidarity and solidarity-based environmental. And I will highlight for quickly points for this presentation is first, understanding defenders' real situation through participatory, gender, and intersectionality sensitive territorial analysis. That is important to interconnect these strategies for eco-solidarity. Second, strengthening capacities of women through training and protection programs. Third, developing legal proposal collaborative to a strange protection system, in the case from the Amazon with the regional gender board and the Ministry of Justice. And final, advocacy to raise visibility and keep protection of policy agendas of these women. Thank you.
Thank you, Marian. Okay, I think we're losing our audience, so maybe we should call it a day. I've put, Dominique has put in the chat the flyers for our 2 events next week. So if you enjoyed this webinar, next week we have 2 more webinars. The one on the 17th is, Pilar, refresh my memory. One's completely in Spanish, and that is the one on the 18th, I believe. And the one on the 17th is in English. So if you're a Spanish speaker, we don't have interpretation, so you need to be a Spanish speaker for the one on the 18th, but on the 17th, it's in English, and they're all related to access to justice. So please feel welcome to come. We thank all of our panelists today for these, really a very nice spread of sociological research on all aspects related to access to justice. We thank our wonderful audience for attending. We will make the recording available to anyone who registered, as well as to our panelists, and we'll be loading it on the ISA website as well. So thanks very much to everyone, and have a good rest of your day, and enjoy the rest of the CSW.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye. Thank you.